I found myself in a yoga class sobbing, just completely decombusting. This experience of receiving yoga and this practice of yoga and the way this person is sharing it is such a blend of all these things that I've been spending my whole life up to that point studying, living, loving. But I can point to that moment that changed the direction of my life.
How did you go about crafting your vision?
The first thing that I did was identify what is the lifestyle that I want. And the delta between six figures and what I was potentially going to make was huge.
Welcome to Midlife Catalyst, a place where ordinary people share extraordinary stories of doing life differently. I'm Amanda Yount, and today's guest is Karen Fabian. Karen is a yoga instructor, podcast host, author, founder of Bare Bones Yoga with a background in rehabilitative medicine and healthcare. She integrates her deep knowledge of anatomy and movement into her teaching, including her signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program. I can't wait to hear more about that. As a certified personal trainer and corrective exercise specialist, Karen empowers yoga teachers to lead confident, accessible classes while understanding the why behind their cues. She hosts conversations with yoga teachers covering anatomy, sequencing, and expert insights. Karen holds a BS in Rehabilitation Counseling, a Master's in Healthcare Administration, and has been teaching yoga since 2002. Karen is here today to share her insights with us. Karen, thank you so much for joining.
Cool. Well, thanks for that nice intro, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. So let's just start with, obviously, yoga is your passion. Has it always been that way for you?
No, actually. I had an experience in 2002, actually in 1999, where I was recently divorced and I was on vacation. I had taken sort of a wellness retreat vacation post-divorce, and I found myself in a yoga class sobbing, just completely decombusting, like the seams were breaking, and I had never taken a yoga class before, so I really was quite unprepared for my emotional reaction. And after that experience, interestingly enough, shortly thereafter, when I returned home to Boston, a friend of mine asked me to go with him to a yoga class he had just found. He had found this studio and he was going to these classes. And he said, it's really hard. And I know you're really into working out. I bet you can't do it. So it was sort of on a challenge. And I went to this yoga class and I walked in the room and I, first of all, couldn't believe how many people were there. Now in Boston in 1999, there were not a lot of yoga studios. Yoga was not popular. And there were a handful of studios. And this was one of the ones that had started to generate a lot of buzz. And so the first thing I noticed was all these people in the room. And I was thinking, what's happening here? It was almost like a cocktail party. There was like a buzz of anticipation. And the teacher walked in the room and I was watching her as she sort of set up the room the way she wanted it. And I was just sort of enthralled by the whole prep. And then we began the class. And within the first few minutes, I found myself feeling like this experience of receiving yoga and this practice of yoga and the way this person is sharing it is such a blend of all these things that I've been spending my whole life up to that point studying, living, loving, anatomy, psychology, wellness, mindset. And it was happening in this room in this 90-minute class where it was packed. And that particular experience really changed me. And that was a long time ago. And a lot's happened since then. but I can point to that moment as the moment that really changed the direction of my life.
That is so encouraging of one moment. So, how say more about that? How did that move forward for you and how did that change your life direction?
So from there, I began taking classes. So I became a really avid student. And as I was taking classes, all of this was happening before social media. So when the studio had something to promote, like a training, there was no posting it on Facebook or Instagram. There was only a poster in the lobby when you walked in the studio. And one day I saw the poster for a teacher training in Mexico. And I said to myself, I have to go get trained in this particular methodology of this studio, of this teacher. And at the time, I was working in a six-figure corporate job. I had worked my way up out of direct healthcare to a health insurance company and then to a consulting firm in the health insurance area. And I was making really good money and I had a house. And like I said, I was sort of recently divorced and rebuilding my life. And so part of me was thinking, this is crazy to go to a yoga teacher training. Where do I think this is actually going to go? But I felt compelled to see it through. And so after that first training, I knew that I wanted to teach. I knew this was my path. So I took the next 18 months to really create and implement a plan to shift from my corporate job and house and lifestyle to becoming a full-time yoga teacher. And I ended up getting hired in that studio system, which was my dream. And that was my initial foray into teaching yoga.
That is so brave. We talk a lot on the podcast. I talk a lot through my writing about when you find what it is that lights you up, that you know this is it, this is the direction.
Yeah.
You follow it, and it may not be the next day, it may be 18 months or however long down the road it takes, but when you find it, you know it. And it's so encouraging to hear your story because, again, you walked away from a six-figure income, what were the people in your life saying to you at that time?
Yeah, so I can remember the people I worked with thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But interestingly enough, I remember on my final day, they had a party for me, and a couple of people came up to me that I worked with and sort of shared with me their secret wish for what they really wanted to do with their life and said to me, it's so inspiring to see you do what you are doing. I really hope I have the courage to pursue. One person wanted to be an author, and I had worked with her for years. I had no idea. So there was that. Of course, my parents thought, this isn't a responsible thing to do. But by the same token, they know I'm a very pragmatic person. I'm not the kind of person that would spontaneously just quit my job. So I was keeping them in the loop about the plan I was creating. And so they were very supportive. So that was really helpful. That was really, gave me the support I needed to keep moving forward. But I knew in my heart, it wasn't really about what anybody else thought. It was really about what I wanted to do. And I knew that I knew deep in my heart, this was something I had to try.
Yes. And it's so encouraging. The more stories we can share of that and of listening to your heart, your gut, that intuition, I think the more confidence it gives other people to tune out the noise.
Yeah, I think nowadays it's even harder because of social media. I think there's a lot of things that people are exposed to, both negative and positive, that can sort of take them off course and can get them into their head in terms of comparing themselves to other people. And that, at that time, I didn't have that because, again, this was in the early 2000s. And so I think on some level that allowed me to stay really focused and follow my own plan. So I work a lot doing a lot of coaching with yoga teachers, and that's a big part of what I do, is sort of helping them hone in on what's your vision? What do you want? And how can we craft a plan to help you get there?
How did you go about crafting your vision? Because you hear that a lot, regardless of profession, role, whatever you're doing. What is your process for the vision?
Yeah. So, the first thing that I did was identify what is the lifestyle that I want. I knew the studio I wanted to teach in, and I started to map out what was going to be the potential revenue I could pull in working for this studio. And the delta between six figures and what I was potentially going to make was huge. And I knew that over time I could fill that gap in somewhat, but I knew initially there was going to be a gap. So I took out a personal loan to cover some of my expenses. I had sold my house and moved into a condo. So I had $50,000 from the sale of my house in a savings account. And I also started to work as a personal chef to bring in some income while I was building up my teaching schedule. But all of this was done before I left my job. I built the plan for this, looking ahead at the day I quit. And then the other really important component that a lot of people don't consider is I needed to have health insurance. And so I looked into, was I going to pay for Cobra? Was I going to get my own plan? And that was another piece that I had to have in place. Once I did those things, then I left my job. And then that began really phase one of my entrepreneurial journey, which is really what it was. It was beginning my own business. Even though I was teaching yoga under the auspices of somebody else's business, I was really out on my own at this point because I was getting paid as a contractor and I could basically do whatever I wanted. And so that was what I did preliminarily. And that was really phase one. What things look like now for me is very different. And I had a number of different inflection points throughout the past 20 some odd years, but that was how I started.
And you were ahead of your time because there wasn't a lot of solopreneurs and entrepreneurs. I mean, now you hear it all the time, right? But again, we didn't have it in our face on social media. And so that wasn't common. And so what gave you that courage?
I think my constitution, the way I'm built, is that I have some qualities that allow me to keep moving forward, to be very planful. I'm very organized. A lot of my corporate work was done in project management. So a good spreadsheet with a list of things to do and due dates and action steps is my vibe. So I used a lot of the skills I used when I worked in corporate to craft my own business plan, essentially. And so that was part of it at the nuts and bolts level. But the other thing, and this is something that really developed over time, is the mindset piece. And the mindset piece is something that I do a lot of work with women on inside my program. And even though the work we're doing is in the context of teaching yoga, it's really work we're doing in the context of feeling confident and feeling empowered as a person. Because no one's going to be able to go in and teach a yoga class confidently if, as a person, they don't feel confident. And so the work that I do with women, and many of them are in their 40s and 50s, getting into teaching yoga as maybe an ancillary career path, a second career after they retire or leave their job voluntarily, whatever the situation is. But a lot of the people I work with are women in their 40s, 50s, even 60s. And interestingly enough, they come with a whole, I mean, as we all do, with a number of things that are blocking them from feeling confident. And so the work I do, which is pretty specific in terms of my methodology, is that. But on a personal level, I have gone through a number of transitions and sort of big shifts when I talked about inflection points before that really shifted the way I look at what I'm doing, how I'm working for myself, and how to keep moving forward even when things might not be working out the way I want them to.
Would you say that's a continual process? I see oftentimes people aren't having the forethought. They're not having the planning to go, I might need to shift how I do my business or I operate.
Yes.
They wait.
Yes. Okay.
And so yes. So is it something that you continually assess and stay ahead of?
You know, I think overall, one of the things that I learned in regards to what you're talking about is this idea of if what I'm doing isn't working, to simply try something different. And I'm not the first person to have said that. Matter of fact, I remember listening to Tony Robbins one time, and he basically shared a similar thought. But I'd already been doing that, and I'd already been thinking that. But I didn't always think that. And there was a point where I realized rather than be upset or frustrated about what's not working right now, why don't I just experiment with something different? And a lot of the work I do with women is around this central concept of experimentation. And it is based on this idea of trying something different, not just to keep the ball rolling, to stay in momentum, but just like a scientist, to learn from, does the different approach give me different results? And so that's at the cornerstone of a lot of how I move forward and allow myself to keep moving forward. And the last piece on this is what I've found when women use this approach is that they end up sort of loosening their attachment to a belief they had. And to just tell themselves, oh, I have to get over this is not good enough. It's like saying, I need to just eat better, but yet all the temptations are there and all the bad habits are there. When we experiment with something different, we allow ourselves to create some space between the belief that we have and create a new paradigm, a new belief about our capabilities, and loosen our attachment to that old belief, which really, what I found in my work with people, and this is so fascinating, is that beliefs are behind just about all of our actions, but we don't always see it. And this is why working with a coach is so important, because someone else that's skilled in this way will see it when you can't. And they can help you just from questions. It's not even therapy per se. It's not cognitive therapy or behavioral therapy. It's really just having someone who's not in your head. I don't mean anybody. I mean, I have background in coaching, but ask you questions to allow you to start to see things in a different way, because the seeing things the same way is what creates that pattern, that habit. And if it's an unhealthy one, that's what creates problems and stagnation.
And it's so important, that circle, the circle of people that we trust with those things. And I say this all the time, it's often not who you would expect,
Yeah.
which is why a coach, a mentor, someone that is not in your best friend group or your household
Yeah.
that can take a pretty objective look at those things is key.
Yeah. Let me be clear. This is not the friend. This is somebody you are paying for their services. Because when you pay somebody for coaching, therapy, whatever it is, you are you have skin in the game. You're investing your money in your growth. When something is free, there's no skin in the game. And therefore, there's no transformation that can really happen. The transformation, in part, is tied to the transaction that you're willing to pay money for a better result, for achieving your vision, for shifting your mindset. I remember one of the inflection points for me in my business was when I got to a point where I was really frustrated and things weren't working out. And this was before I knew about all the things I'm talking to you about now. And I hired a coach, but she was a neuroscience coach. And she had a background in neuroscience, but she was promoting herself as a career coach. So I thought I would hire her to help me get back into the regular workforce, even though in the back of my mind, I didn't want to do that. But I thought I was sort of at the end of the road with my own business. And in our first session, when she asked me an introductory question, I started to go on and on about all the reasons why my business wasn't successful as a lead in to asking her, let's talk about getting me back into the corporate workforce. And within the first 5 minutes of talking to her about this reason and that excuse and this story and this person has such and such an opportunity and I don't, she cut me off and she said, look, if you're going to keep telling me all these stories, we should just save your money right now. If you're willing to take responsibility for yourself and start a conversation about action steps and beliefs and what can we do to help you move forward, great. But if we're just going to stay and talk about all these stories that you've created in your mind, you might as well just keep your money. And I immediately began to cry because I realized all these stories were what was holding me back. All these excuses I was making. Oh, well, my girlfriend's on the cover of Yoga Journal and I'm not. Oh, my other girlfriend got an opportunity with our teacher to host a retreat in Mexico and I didn't. And all of this jealousy-based, envy-based stuff. And my point is that person needed to say that to me and I needed to be open to hearing it in order for me to begin to move forward. And that particular fork in the road for me was a really pivotal shift in my life.
Thank you for sharing that. And now you've mentioned crying twice, and I have to say, I frequently do my best crying after a great yoga session.
Yeah.
Is that a thing? Does that?
Yeah. So, a lot of times what people hear about scenarios like that, and yoga teachers sort of hold up a particular narrative around that experience, is that this idea that the body holds emotion. And so because I teach anatomy, I get into this conversation quite a bit with teachers. And there's not to say that you or anyone can't have ownership over an experience of crying in a yoga class and tie it to that. But if we literally look at things anatomically, our muscles don't hold grief. Our muscles don't hold pain on an emotional level. I don't mean on a neuro level, nervous system level. However, I'm sure you probably agree that when we are emotionally experiencing stress or pain or loss or grief, our physical body is held in a certain way. You know, if you just think about people who are in the hospital that are depressed, or even people not in the hospital, just in our lives who are depressed. And if we look at their posture tends to be hunched over and closed off. And so if we just look at that in terms of the muscles and the posture, we're creating a lot of shortened muscles in the front of the body because we're hunching. So when we go to a yoga class and we do a lot of poses where we're taking ourselves into back bending shapes, we're stretching the muscles. And when we stretch the muscles, we can release some of the tension in the muscles that can, in our mind, not our brain, in our mind, equate to I'm releasing pain, I'm releasing sorrow, you know, the emotional aspect. And that can create a rush of emotion. So the answer that I often share with people is, number one, you can interpret it however you want. This is not to take away from anyone's experience in yoga where they feel like they're releasing something in their muscle that's emotional. I just wanted to share on an anatomical level sort of what's going on. But keep in mind, the body is a holistic system, right? We have the brain, the central nervous system, the brain, and the mind, how we interpret things. And then we're in this yoga class and we're moving around and all these systems are working together, let alone the endocrine system and the cardiovascular system, all of that. And so things happen like crying. And I always say to people, you know, let that be just an observation that you have with yourself, of yourself in that experience. And there's no right or wrong to it. It's really just, it's happening. Maybe it's an opportunity for some reflection, self-reflection, like what does this mean? So yeah, that's my thought on that.
So you alluded earlier to confidence and working with women on confidence, a 5-day confidence challenge. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So earlier this year, actually on January 1st, I sat down and I sort of reviewed all the women I'd worked with in 2024. We're here in 2025. And I pulled together sort of what did I learn about working with all these women? And they all sort of had this common thread of not feeling confident teaching their classes. And as I said before, yes, they're yoga teachers, and yes, that's the context, but it's really the broader context as well. So recognizing that, I said to myself, how can I create something that really anybody can use? Somebody who's not a yoga teacher, to leverage confidence, pulling into play a lot of the things technique-wise and methodology-wise I was using with these women. And so the first thing I did was I created a framework that I call the confidence practice, keeping in mind that feeling confident isn't something that stays the same every day. If it's like a gas meter, some days you wake up, you feel like you can conquer the world. Others days you wake up and you feel like, oh my God, how am I even going to get to 11 o'clock in the morning? So feeling confident is a practice, just like a yoga practice is a practice. It's never like we get to the end of yoga and we say, okay, now I'm X age and I've done all the yoga there is to be done. We're always changing The downward dog I did yesterday doesn't feel like the downward dog I'm doing today. So it's a practice. That's why they call it a practice. So the 6 parts of the confidence practice, think of it like spokes on a wheel. At the center of the wheel, you have feeling confident. And then the spokes around it are the 6 components of how you can live your life, infusing your life with lots of opportunities to feel more confident. So one of them is every day investing in yoga and or movement. Could be a walk, could be a yoga, could be a run, could be lifting weights, anything that's movement. The second part is what we talked about earlier, making experimenting part of your life. When you get stuck, try something different. If you are not getting the results you want, try something different. Just having that daily strategy to anytime you bump up against resistance, let's experiment with something different. The third thing is self-inquiry. Being the kind of person who is self-aware. That could come through journaling, that could come through meditation, it could come through a lot of different ways. It could just be a mindset thing, just being the kind of person who's observant of oneself to be constantly asking yourself questions. Am I happy? Am I doing the right thing for me? Am I on the right track? Things like that. That's usually something people do at the end of the year, the beginning of the year, but I'm talking about making that just a regular part of how you approach your life. The fourth thing is meditation, finding time on a regular basis to sit in silence. The fifth thing is visualization, seeing in your mind what kind of life you want to lead. It could even be what kind of day you want to have. Waking up in the morning and instead of checking your phone, spending 30 seconds visualizing. It could even be just visualizing between when you wake up and getting to lunchtime, but just making that part. And then the last thing is healthy habits. And that is, there's a bunch of things in there, but I'll just leave it at that. People can sort of surmise nutrition, and there's a lot of different things in there. Now, from that, I wanted to create a self-guided experience that people could do, all around putting those 6 pillars into action. So the 5-day confidence challenge is a downloadable PDF, and every day has a different focus. So like day 1 is awareness and shifting your mindset. Day 2 is about body confidence. Day 3 is about communication. And every day has different actual exercises. And I don't mean jumping jacks, like different things you can experiment with. Like one of the things under body confidence is finding your power pose. Finding a pose that makes you feel powerful. And I give you a lot of suggestions around how to do that. And there's actually a reference I give to a study that was done out of Harvard around the hormonal changes that happen when you pose your body in a way that makes you feel confident. So lots of experiences there. I'll give you the link that you can share with your listeners so they can take themselves through the 5-day confidence challenge and see what it feels like.
Yes, I'm excited for that and to learn more, because right now I feel like my power pose is the child's pose, because I'm pretty stuck and tired.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it, and the self-inquiry part is there, is listening to your body. And if what really is resonating with you right now, you don't need anybody's permission to have that be your power pose. I mean, when you think about child's pose taken voluntarily is much better than child's pose taken when you have no choice and you collapse on the bathroom floor in a puddle of tears, right? So part of self-care is recognizing, hey, being on the ground and close to the ground. I mean, we could even look at it energetically. Grounding is a nervous system need to downregulate. So when we are close to the ground, we're more able to self-regulate oftentimes. So again, some of the mindset work I do with women is around sort of that reframing of any scenario. And it's not rose-colored glasses, it's literal reframing to empower the person to start to see things differently. And that's an experiment in and of itself as well. For someone who's a perfectionist or someone who considers themselves a type A person or someone who's a very rigid thinker, it can be life changing to use reframing as a way to start to see things differently. And oftentimes, people that identify with any of those things I just shared, it wasn't by choice, it was how they were raised. They had a parent who modeled that way of life, modeled that way of thinking, and they had no choice in becoming that way. So oftentimes with a lot of the women I work with, they're finally taking ownership of how they want to be as a person. And for some of them, it's in their 50s and 60s.
Yes. So, and that's the thing. It's not too late. We grow,
Absolutely,
we change.
absolutely not. I sometimes hear that from people, and hey, you're still alive, right? Like you
Right.
still
Yep.
have air you're breathing, oxygen you're taking in. And, again, you know, there's so many examples of people who have achieved amazing things later in life. And it's never, ever too late.
Yes. So, speaking of that, I am in the process of writing a book, and you have written several. So, what was that process like for you? And talk about your books.
Yeah, so my books are primarily for yoga teachers. My first book is called Stretched, and it really covers my initial path as a yoga teacher entrepreneur. And I wrote it because I didn't want people to make the mistakes that I had made. One of the experiences I had in the first number of years of my business was I built up $30,000 of debt. And so I had to make a really big pivot decision to go back to a corporate job and teach on the side to pay off that debt. And that's what I did. So I wrote that first book as a way to provide support to teachers who wanted to go into teaching yoga, maybe even full time, and give them a roadmap to do it. I wrote it by starting out with an outline and identifying, just like a table of contents, what are the components. And this was way before ChatGPT, I'll just say. So this was all coming from my brain. So I made an outline, and then I literally sat in my girlfriend's coffee shop, and every couple of days I would write in the outline, I would write one of the chapters. And it took about, I don't know, 6 months. And at that point, self-publishing on Amazon was just beginning. Amazon had bought Create Space, which was a self-publishing division company. And so I self-published that book. And then once I did that, I kind of got on a roll. I sort of demystified for myself how to do it. So when I wrote my second book, which was more focused on the anatomy of yoga, that was a little easier because I just sort of reused the same process. That book was harder only in that it had a lot of pictures, and self-publishing a book with a lot of images is a lot harder than just publishing a book that's all words. Yeah, so that's how I did it. I mean, I think in today's world of publishing a book, if you're self-publishing, you do have ChatGPT to help in creation of the outline. Obviously, if you're working with a publishing house or somebody that's going to do that with you, you have the support of them. I hired my own editor, and I used a different one for each book, but I did have an editor that I hired to go through it as well.
Well, that's amazing. I just have so much admiration for anyone that gets a book done,
Yeah.
much less two. I don't think people that have never embarked on this understand the challenges that you can face.
Yeah. Yeah.
in going through it.
The
So,
labor of love to write a book. That is for sure. I will say, my main focus in terms of how I share information now and how I work with people is through online programming. And I was one of the first people in 2015 to sign up with the online course platform that I use. They were just beginning. They're based out of Canada. Their name is Thinkific. And this was long before learning online was a thing. And that really, it's not that it's replaced for me writing books, but that really is the model that I use to coach women, to provide educational content. Certainly, all the yoga training I do is done via online, my online platform. And that way I reach people anywhere in the world.
and that is Bare Bones Yoga. Is that correct? Where people can find you?
Yes. So my website is barebonesyoga.com, and both on TikTok and Instagram, because now there is social media, so I'm there too, is Bare Bones Yoga.
Okay. Excellent. And I will link and list all of these wonderful resources
Thank you.
in the show notes for people to find you. And as we're wrapping up, are there any other things you want to share?
I would just say to anybody listening that is feeling like they're stuck in their life or they're not feeling really confident, to just make not so much a list, but just pick one thing you can do tomorrow differently than you're doing right now, and just do that. Because once you do that and then do it again and then do it again, that's how you start to build momentum. And when you build momentum, it feels
I love that. And it's so true. Just pick one thing, start small, do it well, and just take action. And you're right. It is amazing that momentum it builds. Well, thank you so much for joining today and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate your time and your expertise.